Okay, good morning, everybody. Are you able to hear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Let's get started. Last time we had a brief introduction to computer architecture. Let's proceed from there. We are still discussing the chapter 1 of the book. And we said that the improvement of computer performance is exponential with time. On a linear scale, linear time scale, and a log performance, the curve appears linear, but this is actually exponential increase. If you can see the prints here, till about 1984, the performance was increasing at a lower pace. It appears sublinear here, but it is not really sublinear. It was increasing exponentially, but then from 1984 onwards till about 2000, just see this line segment here, various processor names are written here. And it is 52% per year. So that is twice as fast. In 2 years, 52% per year. So the performance was becoming twice as fast in 2 years. And then after about 2004 or 5, it has slightly, the slope has slowed down. How do we measure performance? That's we'll discuss little later, but let's now go with our intuitive notion of computer performance, how fast it executes programs. But what has caused this performance improvement? One was we are discussing about the manufacturing technology. That is, more number of transistors are being manufactured. The transistor size has shrunk. We'll denote it by feature size. The feature size has reduced phenomenally. And one byproduct of this reduced transistor size is faster logic. Faster logic means how quickly the transistor switches on and off. Can anybody answer why does reducing the transistor size increases the clock speed? That is faster logic. That is how fast it switches on and off. Does anybody know from your basic knowledge of digital electronics and so on?
Sir, if the transistor is large, then the signal will take some time to would take some time to travel. If it is small, then it will not take some time, and it will result in less delay. Actually.
Okay. So no, not really. Vikram. So what is your name, Vikram? I'll note down
Yes.
all those who give answer. I'll just note down on a piece of paper. Every class I do that.
Sir,
Yes.
capacitance value may increase.
Just tell your name first. See,
Sir,
this is not a physical class. No, I don't know individually. So please tell your name.
Gupta.
Okay. Akshit Gupta, please tell.
So the capacitor size may increase with the decrease in the size of transistor, due to which the value of 1 by root LC will decrease.
Not really. I'll just ask one more person.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, it's Abrar here.
Okay.
So, if the size of transistor is big, then the magnetic carrier that need some time to remove when switching. So I think there it takes time.
Unfortunately, all the answers were way off. way off from the actual answer. The actual answer is something known as sub-threshold switching. We'll just look at that briefly. So the faster logic, as the transistor size reduced, the transistor were forced to operate in the sub-threshold region. And as a byproduct of that, we had very fast logic with increasing, we could realize increasing clock speed of operation. We'll see that just very briefly, even though that's not a focus of this course. That's a focus of digital electronics and so on, but then we'll just look at it briefly. But then the technology improvement, manufacturing technology improvement had its limitations, namely power dissipation. As the number of transistors increased, we had phenomenal power dissipation. We put heat sink on the processors. That was not enough. We put a large fan on the processor, 2 fans. But still the processor on further clock speed increase burned down. We'll just see a small video today how the processor burned down with clock speed increase. So this technology had a limited impact on improving the computer speed. The initial part that you see here till 2004, this was actually largely due to technology. But then after that time, most of the processor speed improvements have come from processor organization, which is the focus of this course. Pipelines, we will discuss about that after some time, maybe after a month or something. And then deep pipelines and effective pipelines. The pipeline as it is has lot of problems known as hazards. And how do we overcome those hazards? So that's the effective pipelines. And not only that, we have parallel execution units, multiple arithmetic logical units, multiple floating point units, and we have special graphics processing unit, GPU, and so on. And another factor which caused the performance improvement is the instruction set architecture. This is the first thing we will discuss in this course, and then we'll look at the processor organization. And here, one of the major thing that came about from a very simple idea. It's so simple that you may laugh that this really caused the performance loop to change its direction. The reduced instruction set computers. As the name says, the instruction set, that is number of instructions supported by the processor, had become too many, thousands. And then we reduced to about 100. And that simple idea that reduced the number of instruction, it caused the performance slope to change. What was the reason? How did it happen? We'll discuss about that. And then in the instruction set itself, we had multimedia. Earlier, computers were only text based, could show only text. Now we have graphics, video, and audio. That's what we call as multimedia. Graphics, audio, video. Nowadays, it's hard to find any computer or a mobile phone where you don't have these graphics, high resolution graphics, animation, video, and good quality audio. And then in the instruction set architecture itself, we had constructs to express parallelism, parallel operations. This we'll see, but it's largely for a higher level architecture course. How do we express parallelism? What are the forms of parallel operation? Multi-threading, hyper-threading, graphics processing unit, the GPUs have become general purpose, GPUs, and so on. Those are for a higher level course. We don't discuss too much here. But then we look at the instruction set architecture and then the processor organization. But surprisingly, another factor in the performance improvement is the compiler technology. Earlier, the compiler was very inefficient. While translating from the high level code to the machine code, it used to produce very inefficient code. And that's the reason for those parts of the program where performance is improvement, they were being hand coded. The hand coded code had much better performance than the compiler. The compilers were doing an awful bad job. Those were the primitive compilers. But then over the years, the compiler technology has improved. We have optimizing compilers. And as you know, in the GCC and so on, you can set various levels of optimization. Even though in the first year BTech course, we don't really use the optimizing options. But then the GCC has optimizing options. And we can set that minus G or something. We set the options and then we give the optimization. It takes a little bit more time for compilation, but produced optimized code which will beat the best programmers' handwritten code. And also it helps find parallelism in code and produces code which can execute parallelly, for example, multiple threads, and also which executes well in the pipelines. And as I was saying, there are levels of optimization of a compiler, and we now produce automatically compile the code which produces more efficient code than the best programmer. So there are 4 factors which have helped in reaching this exponential rise in performance of computers. One is the manufacturing technology. The organization, which is a focus of this course, and the instruction set architecture. These two are the focus of this course. But as a general knowledge, the technology and the compiler, these also have contributed to the performance improvement. Till about 1980s, the performance improvement came mostly from initially from vacuum tubes to transistors, discrete transistor to large scale integration to very large scale integration, and also reduction in feature size. Year after year, the feature size kept on reducing, resulting in smaller and smaller transistors. But what is exactly feature size? Can anybody tell what is a feature size? Those who have done digital electronics and so on.
So the width of the top gate material of the transistor.
Okay, good. It is the length, minimal length of the channel that can be etched on the semiconductor. If we see here, this is a transistor. Source, gate and drain. On the substrate, we diffuse N-type material. And then we etch out this junction here. And on that junction, we have this oxide. The black one that you see here is the gate oxide. And on that we have the gate. And this is the channel length here. And as you can reduce the channel length, you can have more and more transistors. So basically the transistor size is decreasing. And there are various types of processes by which we manufacture. Don't really etch out, even though I use the term etch out the diffused region, but we use masks during diffusion. And also, it's not this simple. Manufacturing is not this simple. As I said, there is a process, large number of steps, maybe 50, 60 steps through which this gets created. And this is not just one transistor. There are layers of this. As I was saying, that some 30, 40 layers of this. So anyway, we'll not get into that. So the feature size is the minimal channel length of a technology, manufacturing technology. And as the channel length reduces, we can put more and more transistor per square inch of the semiconductor. Millions and billions of transistors. But then the improvement due to new manufacturing processes have slowed down. The rate at which the feature size was reducing has slowed down. And one of the reasons is that we have now reached feature size which of the order of few atoms. And when we reduce the feature size to be few atoms, hundreds of atoms and so on, we have this byproduct of heat dissipation. That's becoming a major headache for processor manufacturers. To such an extent that look at here, this slope has reduced here. As I was saying, around 2004, the increasing clock rate was not possible. The processor simply burnt down. So much of heat dissipation occurred. I'll just show a small video today how the processor just burnt down with increasing speed of operation. As we reduce the feature size, the byproducts were increased resistance. You know that on a wire, as you reduce the area of the wire, the resistance increases. And the capacitance increases as more and more transistors are integrated onto a chip. The propagation delays, the wire length increases, and therefore the propagation delay increases. The wire length I was saying about several hundreds of kilometers on a single chip, and hundreds of kilometer propagation delay is large. Even when electromagnetic waves also hundreds of kilometers, and the speed of operation is nanosecond. This caused a problem, but the resistance, capacitance, propagation delays problem were not so much of headache. We can overcome them to some extent by various technologies. We'll see in this course some of them. How do we overcome resistance, capacitance, and propagation delays? But the headache that is there here, the leakage, is the big problem. Don't know how to overcome. We tried all things. Put heat sink, put fan on that. Still, the chip burns down. You can't increase the speed of operation further. The clock speed we cannot increase. Large power dissipation. And as we were discussing the other day, now the power dissipation in the processor is 40 watts or something, an idle. And earlier, in the Pentium processor, it used to be 150 watts on a small area of square inch, about 3 or 4 square inch. 150 watts. So the power density, look at the heater on which you, okay, Avinav, you have a question? Please, anybody has question, please feel free to interrupt, no problem. Avinav, you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
We are increasing the density of the transistors and
Yes.
we are measuring only the feature size. Why are we ignoring the other dimensions?
See, in the manufacturing, if you look at VLSI course, if you do a VLSI course, they will say that, see, in a VLSI course, they discuss about this manufacturing processes and how do you create the mask and so on. So in the manufacturing process, one of the most important step is this creation of the channel. Okay. Now creating a small channel is a challenge. See, the other one you just diffused here, right? As I was saying, the source and drain on the p-type substrate, you just diffused, you doped n-type of dopants, right? And you got your source and drain, and on that you etched out the channel, and that's the challenge. That how do you get a smaller and smaller channel, because the other ones you can manufacture here.
Okay, sir.
And
Thank you.
that's what is a challenge to the manufacturing technology about the smallest length of channel that can be manufactured. And that's why for every technology, manufacturing technology is characterized by a feature size. When we say that it is a 500 nanosecond feature size, which used to occur in 90s, then we had 100 nanosecond, 50 nanosecond, 30 nanosecond, and now we are at 14, sorry, nano meter. Sorry, I just used wrong unit, nanometer. So, and then we have this now 14 nanometer that we will see just in one or two slides. So this is the challenge here, the channel. The other ones are pretty much can be done. It's not a problem with the technology. The technology in getting a small feature size. So the power density is extremely large. In a heater where you cook tea, it is hundreds of inch and you have 500 watt or 1000 watt dissipation. So the power density is 500 by 100. But here, if you dissipate 100 watt per square inch, it's a huge power density and it can melt anything. So it changed the direction of the technology. We'll come to that story here, that increasing clock size was no more an option. We actually reduced the clock size. As I was saying, that from 150 watt, we have reduced now the power consumption to 40 watts or so. And the clock rate has decreased from 3.6 gigahertz of operation. Now we have 2200, 3.5K, 3.5 gigahertz. We have now 2.2 gigahertz and so on. And just see here, this is the card here, the motherboard. And on the motherboard, see the heat sink. I don't know whether anybody has seen a motherboard on a desktop or a laptop. You will see that this card here, and there is a large heat sink here, which is covering the processor, and not only its area is slightly large to be able to dissipate more heat, and on that there is a fan mounted. You can see hot air coming out from your laptop or a desktop, and that's the fan which is operating. The speed of fan becomes very high if the chip gets hotter, but still we are not able to contain the heat. Now let's look at little bit about this power consumption, because I said that it changed the direction of the technology. And at 2004, it was realized that beyond 3.6 gigahertz, it is not possible to increase the clock frequency, because year after year, the clock frequency used to increase. And on that year 2004, just burnt down, the processor burnt down, found that they cannot go in that path anymore. The technology changed direction, and we had this dual core, quad core, and so on from that day onwards. Rather than having a large processor with high clock speed, we said that let us operate at lower clock speed with multiple processors on the same chip. And as you can see that as the manufacturing technology is improving from 90 nanometer to 65, 45, 16 nanometer, see here, initially the dynamic power dissipation, which we call also the switching power, was dominant. But slowly, and now we have 10 nanometer, and the leakage current here, which is the static power, is much more than the dynamic power. The dynamic power dissipation occurs when the transistor operates on and off. Each time it becomes on and off, power dissipation occurs. We'll see the reason why the power dissipation occurs. But static power dissipation occurs whether you are operating the transistor or not. Just continuously, there is a power dissipation, irrespective of the activity of the transistor. And that we call as the leakage current. The power dissipation by the leakage current now has exceeded the dynamic power dissipation. Now let's little bit time we spend in understanding the power consumption in a processor. There are two types of power in a processor. One is the dynamic power and the other is the leakage power. The dynamic power is also known as the switching power. It occurs when the transistor is having its activity on off. And as we speed of operation of the transistor, frequency increases, the dynamic power increases. The leakage power is static power. It occurs irrespective of the activity of the transistor. And if we look at the dynamic power, it is proportional to the number of transistors on the chip, naturally, because each transistor has, as it switches on and off, it independently produces heat. And the energy here is proportional to frequency. Okay, naturally, because as each time it becomes on and off, it produces heat. But also the capacitance into voltage square, half CV square. We'll just see this half CV square, the energy that stores and the capacitance. And what is this capacitance? We'll just briefly, we'll briefly discuss, even though that's not the focus of this course. So the dynamic power is given by the number of transistors into capacitance. This is the parasitic capacitance. We don't build into capacitance. It just appears there. It's the parasitic capacitance. Half CV square, the voltage of operation of the transistor. And the transistor voltage, you know that the vacuum tubes, etc., used to operate at 150 volts and so on, 100 volt. But then, do you know what is the voltage now the transistors operate on a VLSI? Anybody has a guess? What's the voltage of operation of the
2.5 to 3 volts range.
No, the transistor will break down at that voltage. The transistor has become so thin, it breaks down the dielectric, that is the oxide layer, and the transistors will all be gone, burnt down. They operate 0.6, and slowly the voltage of operation has come down, 0.5. We'll just see that in the next slide. So the voltage of operation has reduced, and the capacitance is a parasitic capacitance. And this is a intuitive formula. We don't really have to make special effort in remembering this formula. It's very intuitive because dynamic power is proportional to the number of transistors on the chip, the frequency of operation of the transistors, and also CV square. This is the parasitic capacitance and the voltage. We'll just see that next diagram, and this will become clear. And at least in this part of the course, we don't really want you to remember something by mugging it up. Whatever is intuitive, conceptually clear, only those things are required. And if you see anything, any of your learning, as long as you have conceptually understood, it lasts a lifetime. If you have mugged up, it lasts for a day. You forget it. So we don't really ask any question which requires you mugging up. You just need to understand the concepts. Now the dynamic power, we just saw that little bit of the details of the dynamic power, but the leakage power is exceeded the dynamic power. Now let's look at different Intel chips, the Pentium, Pentium Pro, Pentium 2, Pentium 3, and P4, which is the Pentium 4. The clock speed has continuously improved. The year of release 93, 95, 97, 99, 2000, and the clock speed has increased from 60 megahertz to 1.5 gigahertz. And the number of transistors per chip has increased from 3.1 million to 42 million. And as I was saying that now we have billions of transistors on the chip. And you can imagine that the dynamic power increases as we put more transistors and more frequency of higher frequency of operation linearly. And the one that is actually square, that fortunately has not increased, it had actually reduced, but the capacitance has increased. Now let's look at the switching power, which is some constant A CV square into the frequency of operation. Now let's look at this transistor here. There is a parasitic, if we represent the model of the transistor, the parasitic capacitance we represent here. The parasitic capacitance is C here, and as the transistor switches off to switches on, say on is zero current, sorry, on is, okay, let's look at the voltage curve here, 0 volt ground here and high voltage. So there is this transition occurring from on to off. And when it is on, there is a current flow here on this transistor. And then this capacitance gets charged, and the energy stored on the capacitance, this is a parasitic capacitance, is half CB square. And V is the voltage applied. And as we said that initially it was 5 volts of operation for transistors, and then slowly reduced with every manufacturing technology, because they were causing breakdowns of the dielectric, and therefore the voltage has reduced, but then it is half CV square as this part becomes on. See, these are complementary logic, and as this becomes on, this is on this transistor, and therefore this half CV square gets stored here, and then we have this on state here, and we have high voltage appearing on the output. And as this becomes on, now this capacitance, whatever voltage was stored here, gets discharged through here. So every cycle half CV square flows here. The transistor gets charged, it gets discharged. So the switching power is CV square into frequency of operation into some constant. Now let's look at the static power or the leakage power. There are two types of leakage actually. One leakage occurs from drain to gate and from gate to the, source to the drain, source to the junction, and from junction to the drain. We'll see why it occurs. And another type of leakage occurs is the subthreshold leakage or the substrate leakage. Both of these occur continuously irrespective of the transistor operation. We'll see little bit detail of the static power. Now, this is the source junction leakage, and this is the drain junction leakage here. The junction to drain we can represent here as a reversed bias diode, and there is a leakage. We'll just see why the leakage occurs. Both of these leakages occur, and the other is the substrate leakage or the subthreshold current. Now let's look at these two components. One is the substrate leakage. We'll just see the reason what it causes current to flow on the substrate. and the other is the source to gate and gate to drain. We'll see this component also. Now first let's look at the sub-threshold leakage. The transistor that you studied in your digital electronics course, we said that there are two states of the transistor. One is on and off. And just see here this transistor at 1.8 volt, it is on, high current, 100 microampere. But then at 0 volt, the current is negligible, 100 picoampere. So if we are able to operate the transistor between 0 and 1.8, we have a proper transistor with very little threshold leakage, 100 picoampere, negligible. And at on state, it has 100 microampere of current. But then, as the geometries have shrunk, the voltage applied to the gate must be decreased to maintain the reliability of operation. Otherwise, the gate will burn down. The oxide layer, there will be a breakdown. We can't apply 1.8 volt on a nanometer length gate width of nanometer. So we need to force to operate at 0.3 volt here. Just see here, 0.3 volt. This is the sub-threshold. So here on means 100 nanoampere, off means 10 nanoampere. The byproduct of this is that we are able to have a very fast logic. Switching from here takes very less time, from 100 nanoampere to 10 nanoampere to 100 nanoampere. The 100 picoampere to 100 microampere switching takes considerable time. The voltage changes and there is capacitance, remember, gets charged and so on. But here, this is straightforward, takes very less time. So, as the threshold voltage is reduced, because to maintain reliability and prevent breakdown of the gate oxide, the transistor cannot be switched from complete off to complete on. The voltage swing is restricted and we have strong current in the on state and slightly lower current on the off state. And this we called as the sub-threshold operation. The ideal transistor which you have studied in your digital electronics course, it operates in the saturation region and cutoff region. But we don't operate in the cutoff and saturation region. We operate on the sub-threshold region. Because of this, to maintain reliability, we have reduced the voltage swing here, the voltage of operation and the voltage swing. Anybody has question, please unmute your mic and just ask the question. Feel free to ask the question.
Sir, why are we not reducing the voltage further so that we get the faster switching, even faster switching?
Okay, good question, Avinav. But then I was just saying about this leakage power. Remember, this leakage power is a big headache. If you reduce further, the power, the current that will leak through here in the on and off state, I mean continuously it will leak through, it will burn down. We are not able to reduce further because it becomes very difficult to operate. And with this, we are barely able to manage. We'll just see that little bit as in our subsequent slides. But reducing the voltage further, there will be, it will further down here, and that will really have large leakage power. Now,
sir, I have a question.
Okay, sorry, and what's the question? Sorry.
So did you mention previously that decreasing the size of the transistor would lead to increase in leakage current?
Yes, correct. As
But
we reduce the transistor dimensions, we have to operate in the subthreshold region. We cannot really operate in the saturation cutoff region. And therefore, when we operate in the subthreshold region, in the off state also, there is substantial current, and in the on state, there is little more current.
So, but according to the graph, isn't the leakage current going down as we decrease the operating voltage, which also decreases with transistor size?
Not really. See here, we are not switching from 100 picoampere to 100 microampere. We are between 10 nanoampere to 100 nanoampere. There is a small swing here, and the leakage power is here 10 nanoampere.
Okay.
We'll not really go into the physics of it. Those who are interested, they can read the papers on the net. You can just search a little bit. You'll find enough good material. Lot of discussion has occurred here. It's a huge area of research for those who work on VLSI technologies and so on. It's a major component of a VLSI course.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Now the other leakage is the gate leakage. One is the leakage occurring from the source to the gate, and the other from gate to the drain, which is the tunneling leakage. First, let's look at the junction leakage. The junction leakage, as you know, that any reversed biased PN junction has some leakage given by this equation, e to the power something minus 1. Okay, this is the drain current, and then there is a leakage here. It depends on the leakage, depends on the doping level, area, perimeter of diffusion region. But the other component, which has increased year by year as we reduce the feature size, is the tunneling leakage. We'll just see little bit of the tunneling leakage. Here, even though we have an oxide layer, which is supposed to be insulating, but as we reduce it to the size of a nanometer, just see here, very small oxide layer, size of nanometer, it no more appears like a insulator. The quantum mechanical phenomenon of tunneling occurs here when we deal with the insulator of the size of a nanometer, that is few atoms thick. We don't have the normal physics operation here. We have the quantum mechanical tunneling occurring here. And just see here this plot here. This is the voltage of operation, and on the y-axis is the log scale current in ampere per centimeter square, current density. And here, when we had the manufacturing technology, the feature size was 1.9 nanometer, the leakage was occurring okay. But then as the manufacturing improved, we had 0.6 nanometer. As the voltage, the VDD also decreased. Fortunately, the VDD also decreased. We were forced to decrease the VDD, that is the voltage applied to the transistor. But then even with that, the current has increased substantially. The leakage current. Why? Because of the tunneling. The oxide layer is only 0.6 nanometer, which is about 100 atoms thick. And then we have this tunneling occurring, and we don't really use this formula anymore because we must consider the tunneling. And if we look at the tunneling here, just look at this black one, which is the gate oxide. And the gate oxide now is about 1.2 nanometer, which is about 5 atoms thick. And at this small thickness of operation, we must consider the quantum phenomenon of the electron tunneling between gate and channel. It's no more an insulator. The electrons are not stopped by the insulator, they just tunnel through it. Now let's look at the dynamic power which we were discussing. The formula, we said that some constant CV square, A is the activity factor, that is how much time the transistor is operational, because the transistor is not continuously operating. In a multi-core processor, the different cores get switched off until there is some work. And even in the normal transistor, they don't operate until they get the enabling signal. They get enabled and then there is activity. So the terms here is the capacitance, voltage square, activity, and the frequency of operation. And the dynamic power is the summation of all this across all the transistor. Now we had already said that dynamic power is due to the transistor switching on and off. Now let's look at the over the years, what is the trend in capacitance, voltage, activity factor, and the frequency. The capacitance has become dominant. The parasitic capacitance is increasing phenomenally year after year. The voltage of operation is reducing. We are saying that as the transistor size decreases, the voltage of operation needs to reduce to prevent breakdown. The activity factor is reducing as more and more number of transistors are available. Each transistor is required to do less work. The activity of the transistors is reducing. The frequency of operation is also reducing. As we said, that heat dissipation and so on. We cannot go beyond some frequency. And we said we'll show a video. Now over the years, if you watch here, that okay, the animation is not appearing here. All these have become small, but the capacitance is really increased. And in future, power dissipation is a major factor. The cost of transistor has reduced from about $1. We are talking of the chip, the transistor etched on the chip. $1 to 1 billionth of a dollar. Continuously shown here up to year 2002, but the trend continued. But then the power density has increased substantially on a log scale. It's a linear, so exponentially the power dissipation by the processor is increasing. The density was equal to a hot plate in about 95 or something, and at 2002 it's just less than a nuclear reactor, the power density of a nuclear reactor. And then we said that we observed the chips burning down, and then we changed the direction of the technology, and we are not really trying to exceed this. We are reducing the frequency of operation, and each chip is now having multiple processors called as the multi-core processors, where the different cores are not switched on until required, and they're switched off as soon as not required, and so on. If we look at the IC power trends, see here, generation after generation of the processors, that is Intel 286, 386, 486, Pentium, Pentium 4, the i7, the Kentsfield, the Core i5, i7, etc. Initially, the clock rate was increasing. The frequency of operation 3.6 gigahertz, that is 3600 megahertz, kept on increasing year after year. But I was saying that in this year 2004, as we try to increase beyond 3.6 gigahertz, the chip burnt down. I'll just show you a small video what happened. And then from that year onwards, we are actually reduced. The frequency has not increased since 2004. The clock rate has not increased. It has actually reduced. And also we have this multi-cores, and then we switch off the cores when not in operation just to reduce the power consumption. Now, this is the processor chip, and on that there is a heat sink. I was just showing you a figure where there is a heat sink, and on that heat sink there is a fan, large enough fan, and the speed of the fan increases as the processor becomes more hot. Now, let's see what happens when we reduce the, we take out the heat sink and the fan. I think we'll just show that, and with that we'll conclude this lecture. We'll meet on the Monday. So next Thursday, we'll have a quiz about 15 minutes, because there are 4 classes. We'll have a 15-minute quiz at the end of the next class. Sorry, not next class, on Thursday. We'll have a small quiz on the team itself, Microsoft team. And so just announcing so that all of you are aware that there will be a quiz on Thursday. Monday we'll have a normal class, and we'll just show this video now, and we'll stop this class. So, okay, this doesn't, I think it doesn't show you. I'll just upload, I'll share my screen, that will show. This is a problem with the team, doesn't show unless I share my screen. So I'll just share my screen here, and then you can see the video. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is a YouTube video. It shows what happens when you take out the heat sink and the fan on the processor. See the fan, the heat. Here, either P3 application reaches see here to the
Hello, sir. You're not audible.
Not audible, is it? Are you able to see the video?
Yes, sir. We are able to see, and you are audible also, I guess.
Okay, so I think in the team there is some difficulty in showing this video. So you please download the slide. Oh, so that's still just okay. So we'll stop here now. Already at the end of our class. We'll continue on Monday, and Thursday there will be a quiz. Any quick questions? Okay, we'll stop here. Throughout the class, please feel free to ask any questions. We'll stop here.